Great to see you all, and thank you so much for joining us for our Leadership Journeys conversation with MycoWorks co-founder Phil Ross. Such a special guest to have with us today. As a reminder to all, this is an ongoing series where the People Culture team is facilitating conversations with leaders at MycoWorks to give you an insight into our approach to leadership and to share resources and skills for you to develop in your own journey as leaders. So without further ado, an intro to Phil. So Phil is an artist and an innovator in the fields of biotechnology, biomaterials, and mycotexture, which is a term that Phil coined, which refers to the design and building with mycelium. Phil's been advancing the structural and material applications for mycelium for over 30 years, including creating and exhibiting the first ever self-standing structure made from mycelium bricks back in 2007. And also creating the flexible mycelium material technology that has become the basis for our Fine Mycelium technology platform and all of our products today. So it is no exaggeration to say that Phil is probably single-handedly one of the people responsible for creating the field and industry of mycelium technology. And it is because of Phil that MycoWorks was founded. Phil has exhibited artworks and published his research on mycelium technology in arts institutions and outlets all around the world. And like myself, Phil is from New York City, and came out to California a long time ago to do his higher education and has made California his home. So please join me in welcoming Phil Ross. We're going to dive in with questions, but again, I know you all have burning questions for Phil, so please join me in interviewing Phil. So this first question is one that I often have to answer on your and our behalf, and it would be amazing to hear it straight from you. How did you get into mushrooms in the first place, and how did that lead to you experimenting with mycelium as a material for art and design?
Yeah, thank you for having me here. It's really exciting to be here and to be in front of you all. Thank you so much for continuing to fan the flames or keep things burning. I did not, I've told this story I think a number of times, but I didn't have any exposure to mushrooms through most of my life until I was about 23 or so, and I was working at as a chef and a sleepaway camp in upstate New York. And one of the other chefs was like, let's go out mushroom hunting because there's nothing, you're in the country, there's nothing to do. And it was just really exciting to go out and collect wild mushrooms for eating, gourmet mushrooms. And I had never seen mushrooms like this. I'd never tasted mushrooms like this. And I never experienced the forest like that either, as sort of like a treasure hunt and a way to unlock, kind of an understanding of nature in relationship to how you think about the world. So that was sort of the first exposure, and then I just took to that, and then all of my free time was spent out in the woods looking for mushrooms, and I started to collect them. I would bring them to New York City to sell them at gourmet supermarkets, those kind of things, and so that just led to this sort of subsistence income for a number of years. And then it was during the HIV crisis and going to the pot clubs and seeing reishi for the first time as a cultivated organism. I just didn't know that people were could grow mushrooms like that. And so that was my exposure. And then it was through traditional Chinese medicine that I got to know reishi, mostly for its medicinal effects in traditional Chinese medicine, and then started to grow it. Read Paul Stamets's book, Growing Gourmet and Medicinal Mushrooms, which I think was published in 1988 or something like that, and just sort of took that as a cookbook for how to grow mushrooms. And it first was for medicine, but then just growing the mycelium, being a sculptor, I realized pretty immediately that this was really interesting as a sculptural medium. in that it could be cast, as you all know now, that it'll just take on the form of any container, the substrate that it was put within. And so that just seemed like really in line with my artistic education of like how to cast plaster or cements or plastics. And so I had a lot of mold making knowledge and people who made pretty sophisticated molds for casting things. So I relied on my expert network around me to really sort of figure that. So as much as it was the mushroom cultivation, it was really sort of thinking of the whole through process. So that's I think the origins of it.
So from foraging to in like a culinary context to medicinal use to artistic use.
Yes.
And along that journey, you moved from New York to California to go to college, right?
Yeah, I was working in the summer times because these were camps. So I was kind of going back and forth, and I would either come to California or I would save up enough money and then just go traveling. I traveled around the world for like 3 or 4 years, and that again sort of itinerant artist, chef, caterer kind of way.
And as an artist, you started working with living materials early on in your practice. And were you working with other living materials in addition to fungi?
Yeah, it's weird that I've become like the mushroom guy and I'm still in denial. I'm like, I'm not a mushroom person.
You're the mushroom guy.
I've only been doing it 35 years. It's just, I'm still not part of that. But for me, it was much more, as much as it was like mushrooms are interesting, I don't have this particular infatuation with mushrooms. I don't have mushroom paraphernalia. Like the subject of mushrooms, I have a very limited, appetite for some of the extraneous cultural elements of mushrooms as well. And for me, it was much more interesting about the environments that mushrooms grow inside of, and particularly when they enter into the human environment of like how we grow things. And so I've designed gardens. I have created all sorts of life support systems, and really kind of thinking of that as my intellectual thesis was much more in the architectural realm of thinking of like, how do we take care of other organisms when we have close associations with them? So at the time that we founded MycoWorks, I was working on a large dance experiment to express molecular biology. So really kind of thinking more about genetics or genomics at that point, and the body as an expressive way to understand those things, as well as other, more typical garden designs that I was working on, and a number of other projects. So there was mushrooms, but then there were like all these other things. And in my past, I've worked with oysters, I've worked with plants, I've worked with other animals, but always thinking about like the idea of the zoo, or some structured way that human beings accommodate other living things. And what is that sort of intermediary? It's not natural. They're not living in our houses, but somewhere in between that, or like that realm. And that's sort of, again, like I think just this evolution in human symbiosis is the things that we live with and how closely we associate with them. And do we bring them indoors? And so even MycoWorks here, like we are bringing mushrooms indoors, and that is a pretty profound step in how we associate with another living thing. Like bringing plants inside is only a relatively recent journey, over the last 200 years, that plants have really come into our living environments in a more profound way. And animals, they've always sort of lived in association with us. They kind of, in fact, we've kind of pushed them out of our houses in most instances. So really just sort of thinking of that more of like, how do we create these automated structures that take care of things? And that's really just a reflection back on us. Like, how do we create automated structures? The HVAC system in this room, the lighting, the water being pumped in the bathrooms, all of these sort of accommodations of our animal existence are thought out and engineered into these structures. And that also determines the ways that we move through these spaces, or our associations. And the same thing is true for the mushrooms, is also true for us. A long-winded way.
Yeah, I love that, and I think it points to a lot of the ways that what I'm interested in and what you're interested in really resonate. Once you go beyond just thinking about the thing itself, like the mycelium or the mushroom, and you're thinking about a system and the entire context and the relationality around it, that to me is where you get into the ethics and like the stewardship of environments and the stewardship of resources, and that includes the people and communities around them. And so I love the essay. So I love that you brought your catalog. So this is a catalog from the first big project that Phil and I ever worked on. This is where Phil and I came together, and people who are online, it's like this. And it was an exhibit called Biotechnique. It was at Yerba Buena Center for Arts, which is an arts presenting organization here in San Francisco. It was, to my knowledge, the first ever large-scale exhibit on the history of biotechnology as an art and design and cultural practice that extends as far back as to fermentation practices, creating wine in large, amphora, to creating lab-grown muscle tissue with as an artistic expression. So there's a great essay in this catalog by Pamela where she is talking, and she's a very esteemed art historian scholar at Yale now, I think, where she says, the thing that's interesting about bio art is not the fact that it's using an oyster shell or grass or plants or mushrooms, but that it is looking at the system. And once you're looking at the system, you're looking at pressures, forces, balances, dynamics. And to me, that's where you can very quickly make the metaphoric leap to what is the system of the world? What are the imbalances and dynamics that inform all of us? And why do some entities flourish and others are suppressed? And so it's a very rich place for metaphor in terms of thinking about the entire world and all of us in it. Also long-winded. Let's get back to MycoWorks.
Yeah.
So this is a question that always comes up. I'm asked it. We now work with a Ganoderma strain.
Yeah.
In your early years of experimenting, did you try many different species, and how did we come to focus in on this one?
Yeah, the Ganoderma. My initial love for the polypores really was through that attraction, their aesthetic attraction. They were just so beautiful and seemed like coral or antlers or something from another planet. Like, I just didn't think that there were organisms like that. It was really sort of surprising to me. But then there's a lot of other amazing, interesting mushrooms, really compelling aesthetic things that you find in the woods, or just their materiality. So yes, experimented with a lot. Oh gosh, scores. 30, 40 different mushrooms, some of which were from culture libraries, some of which I cultivated myself, all those kind of things. There is the Ganoderma part of it is that there was common knowledge. It is grown by a lot of farmers, either for their own kind of hobby, things. Even mushroom farms that are growing shiitakes will often have like a room full of Ganoderma, just because they love them too. They like to watch them grow. They appreciate them. They appreciate the cultural exchange, the social exchange by bringing them to the market. It's not necessarily a profit driver for them. So there was just already this widespread culture of growing the Ganoderma. There was a huge history, materia medica, again going into traditional Chinese medicine and into Asian cultural practices around this as a medicine. So there was a proven safety record around them, and that was citable. And for a lot of these other mushrooms, it's just like a black box. And in terms of all of the validations, of any kind of things, or just even finding information. This is, again, even pre-internet, just going to a library and finding information about a mushroom, there was more information about the Ganoderma than there was about anything else. It's just been in human thinking for millennia. And so, as an example, Vera Meyer, a colleague at the Technical University of Berlin, she is growing also mycomaterials using a polypore from Germany, but it is a completely different species. And so they have very similar material outcomes, even maybe some better outcomes in terms of that, but there's no safety information they can go to. There is no idea of, again, skin allergies. There's been no studies of those kind of things. So if they're going to bring those things to market, they're also going to have to do all of that other validations. And so that just, again, as we all know from this, it's just been there's so much weight to lift to qualify these, or to de-risk, or to bring it into some larger thing. So that's kind of the more rational approach towards it. But in terms of the creative materiality of it, I don't know what the word is exactly. I'd say plasticity, but that's not as a material quality, but in a responsiveness. And I think of like virtuosity in terms of like maybe how one uses an instrument and you can feel it. Like if you have a violin and you're a very good practitioner, like you are listening to the instrument as you're playing, and there's sort of a feedback loop that's going on. And the Ganoderma is so responsive to human inputs or manipulation that it responds almost very very fast. So there's something of just like that. Again, I don't know if that's relationship, but it's in relation. You can feel it in relation to human behaviors. And I don't think of that as a mystic or spiritual or like thing, but it's just more of like, again, the same way that dogs are responsive to humans and we live in a virtuous relationship with them where there's like feedback. I mean, maybe that's the idea of feedback, is the concept. And in a dog, like there's constant feedback between you or any animal that you're like, yeah, this is paying attention to us in some sort of ways and responding. And it's not negative, like it's not biting my face off when I do that. It's sort of purring or whatever, whatever it is.
And you're talking to the right people because this is a team entirely focused on paying attention to what this mushroom wants and creating the right environment for it.
Yeah. They're rangy too.
Yeah. I have all my questions queued up, but I want to pause briefly here because in case anyone's inspired to ask a question related to what we've talked about so far.
I will. Thanks for all the beautiful conversation. My question is, was there a pivotal moment or reflection where you saw a company, a foundation building up, or was it more gradual? So,
it was more of just like like I just don't have, I didn't have at that time a corporatist mindset. So even just forming, beyond like forming a lemonade stand in my life, like that was sort of like the extent of my business planning I'd ever undertaken. I've always been a hired gun, like as a chef or a teacher. Like I could sort of have this solo way of supporting myself. So I just had never really thought of joining a company or even being part of a company ever. So it was just not really a thought process. So it just more emerged. And I think it was like getting these various cold calls from like 3M, DuPont, Ford Motor Company, GM, Gucci, Dior, like just all these folks who were like, is Phil Ross there? I want to talk to Phil. And it was just like, okay, I know this is not normal, so I should probably figure out how to respond to this, like, and that's again, like where, and I don't even know if like when it was more of just to survive. I think like it felt like so reactive. And it felt like there were so many threats. And so it didn't even feel like a business. It felt like more just trying to protect something valuable. And that was kind of the thing, just like really feeling like there's something valuable here, but not really quite knowing where that should sit in the world. And so again, like I had more exposure to academics. I was like, does its value lie in academia, or does is it a cultural value? Is this an economic value? But we just sort of knew in the ways that people were being attracted to it, or in that it was like without trying to address those entities, like they were hearing something that they were being called to. And Sophia and I had worked together. We were very much aware of corporate power, corporate representation, but really from the outside. And so we just understood that there were power relationships. And so I think it was more about that it's like as an individual, you cannot stand in power to these entities. And so then we had to become multiple bodies joining together. That was the only way that we could sort of engage with beings of this order. It was sort of like a planet coming, and how do you talk to a planet? You need to be a planet or something, in terms of that relationship. Like planets don't relate to people. So it was sort of like that. Just like, okay, here's some weird godhead. We better create one too.
And as I remember it, we hadn't been in touch for a couple of years. I was finishing my PhD. You were doing your thing, and you popped up and had me to dinner, and you said, there's interest from all sorts of companies around the world. And so I think we could become a company to like engage with them. But at that point you had already filed a patent, right? Because you had done that in the years prior, understanding that what you were developing in your art studio had potential in that way, that needed protection in that way.
Yeah. I mean, I saw that there were other entities who were starting to patent in this space and were taking, I had been kind of Johnny Fungal seed, kind of like teaching people about mycelium and how to grow it and all this kind of stuff. And the basic technologies or techniques that I had, figured out in terms of molding and processing and using this as a medium. And then I was finding patents, for these ideas, and I was like, okay, that like these obviously somebody thinks this is valuable. So, but these patents were not any way that I would make something. So I was just like, okay, this is interesting, but this isn't how I do it. So I realized like I better protect this. And so that's when I was like, I should describe what I'm doing that's very, that nobody else quite knows about yet. Just to, and again, it wasn't even more of, I was so naive. It wasn't like, oh, we'll make a patent and then we'll do something. It was more of just like to protect that and that idea. And afterwards, I was like, yes, you would only do that if you think that it's worth a certain value or if you're going to do these kind of things. But again, I didn't, it was more just like for my freedom to operate. Like I didn't want anyone telling me that I couldn't do what I was doing already and that I couldn't give away my technology for free or do whatever I wanted to. So it was more of just like a personal, I felt it was like starting to incur on my freedoms, my personal freedoms. And so that was really just sort of my reaction to that.
Yeah. And I want to underscore this very interesting tension that has existed from the beginning because this grew out of your practice and you did come from a very open science, community science, academics around the world sharing your research mindset. And then we did have to move into this sort of build some walls, file patents, create protections. Because, and this is a tension that exists in the development of any new technology, because often the principle is, let's make this available to everyone, right? There is a very like a drive towards ubiquity, and there are stages along the way where you have to very closely guard it in order to have freedom to operate, right? And that is because of the pressures of our society as it is and how things are funded and how things are developed. So, it will be very interesting to talk about OpenFung, which we are going to get to in this conversation, which is your current project. I want to not leap over this very interesting moment. Sachin, that was the perfect question to bridge to my next question was, okay, so you realize you got to file patents. Maybe you got to make a company, become a planet to talk to these other planets. Can you share a bit from your perspective, like our journey in the first few years of MycoWorks, trying to figure out what our product was going to be and what our business was going to be?
Oh my God.
I've had to answer this question a lot. I want to hear your version.
I just think we were so naive.
We were really naive.
And that maybe helped us in some ways, from like, but just a lot of energy expended into different avenues. But it's also like, I can't make a great qualification because we did okay. So it's like, maybe we did exactly what you're supposed to do. But I think like we didn't really have a set idea other than like, this is a really interesting, and I should just regress a bit, like the idea of what I was protecting. I was working on this multi-year project to build a giant building out of mushrooms, really just as like a larger version of this tea house. And that's what I was developing everything towards. And I didn't want anyone to stop me from building my house. That was kind of like really like, it was like, again, like my limited scope. And I had a very arcane, esoteric fantasy of what that would look like. Something like Drop City after it had deteriorated, which was this utopian hippie idea of an instant city that you would build it, something like Burning Man exists today. You would just kind of build this thing. It would come into being and it would act as a way to have social interactions, and then it would sort of disappear. And I imagined myself inside of like this decrepit, weird mushroom building with my hair the length it is now. I predicted that. I was like, but I was sort of myself naked in a beach chair in the middle of that building. That was my fantasy. That was the idea I was working towards, and I was not going to have anyone stop me on fulfilling that. This was really in my mind's eye. I was like, if I keep going, I'll be able to achieve this, and I've been able to get every step of the way. So, and it was like, and then like it was like, oh wait, but we got to get a patent, and oh man, there's interest in what we're doing, and I never got to build my house. I feel like really ripped off, like.
You can still do it.
Still do it. Yeah, I think finally I could get. And there's also a lot of stray cats somehow inside of the building. Like I don't know. But when we decided to become a corporation, we were like, we can't have an a priori idea of what this is going to be. We felt like, that is, we couldn't have a preset idea of what our company should do. We were like being very responsive to anyone who would come to us. So we did toxic waste amelioration. We grew, oh my God, some horror, like it might exist in Bernal Heights, and I think the only piece of existing MycoWorks mycotexture, which is like a weird laminated shelf in an exercise gym.
In a private gym in Bernal, there's the first thing we ever sold, which is a couple shelves made from mycelium panels.
Laminated
with
in
bamboo.
Sparkly. No, it was like the worst. It was so sad. It was so sad because we're like, we made this amazing organic thing. We figured out how to make it with bamboo. Like it can do all this stuff. And they're like, no, we want it like this horrible laminated purple. Like you have no idea what's inside of it. It was so depressing. And then, and then it was like structural insulation panels, these kind of like, sandwich layer kind of things. And we did some DARPA research like a subcontract to prove that you could create biodegradable drones made out of cardboard, which 10 years later, I just saw they have now exist. So we did some early research on that, and then I think like, again, like we were just sort of like in response to, so if anybody had any sort of contract work, we're like, we'll do it. And then the same thing, like, yes, maybe this goes into, we created the rationale for creating the mycelium leather over here was a fancy car company. I don't even remember who. Mercedes. Again, it was like somebody, some ethereal planet-sized corporation was like, "Hey, can you make a silicon, an expanded silicon, like a yoga mat sort of material for these cars, because these materials are really toxic, and California's about to enact some law, and we need this new material." And we didn't know, but like every luxury car you buy has something like 300 to 400 pounds of vibration damping foam made out of this expanded silicon, which is why your Mercedes or BMW feels so nice, is that it's incredibly well insulated. So we made this thing, this very thick, pure mycelial kind of slabs for them. But then the unit economics, we could just, again, like, we're like, I don't know, this stuff costs like $1.70 for, a pound or something of this. And we were like, ours would only cost, $1,700. So it was like, all right, no. And then, and so that, I don't know how long we were like, yeah, well, that was a nice experiment. And then I think it was like Dr. Scholl's or some similar company. I think they were the first one where it was like, we need a leather substitute for some insoles. And it was like, for this, the size of a piece of leather for an insole. And they were like, we could get you $1. Like we would pay you $1 per unit on that. And then we realized, like, in a sheet, we're like, oh wow, okay, that's like, that makes sense. Oh my gosh, we could like get $40 for one sheet, or whatever. We were just like, that's a lot more than like a weird composite shelf in a like an exercise gym in Bernal Heights. So it was just like, that made sense. And then it was like, oh, this is probably, and then there were a couple of other leading shoe brands that also came to us about the same time, and we're like, can you make some leather like thing? And then we were like, that was like 3 strikes for leather, all within like a 1 or 2 month period, where like something's going on with leather. And that's just when we started to look upstream or ask questions or figure out like what's going on with leather.
Yeah.
That everybody is interested in leather at this point, and for luxury leather. So that was really sort of like when there's like 3-4 years of just like trying out everything.
Yep. So essentially went from structural bricks and panels to foams to compressed foams to leather, which is roughly. Are you ready to talk through some funny old photos?
Oh my God. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. There they are. That was it.
Yeah.
Did they float? It's like, did they absorb water?
I think Phil too might have been involved at this stage, potentially, creating basically insole type things.
Yeah, I mean, I thought one of the more salient qualities of this is that you could make things that are as thick as elephant skin or rhinoceros skin if you really wanted to, like that this could do really strange exotics that were unethical. So again, like my lack of business acumen was like how much demand is there for elephant leather in the world?
And that we were also very compelled by the idea that you could place living strips of material together and then they would fuse. So you could have, stitchless objects, right? And so here's a flip flop.
Yeah.
We tried to make.
This is, I mean, so when you, my training is in the ideas of how things look, like what when we see something, how does it make us think about that thing? Like, what are the values that we bring to it? And these are some of the most advanced technologies on the planet, I think, in terms of bioengineering right here. But they look like some weird, rawhide chew toy, which MycoWorks has still not manifested the potential really of what this technology can do. And so again, like my more inventive thinking rather than market-based thinking was like, you could just make an origami object where you just kind of die cut out the thing, and then it's like you insert slot A into this, and then it just grows together, and then you're just sort of like, you have no fasteners, there's no whatever, it's just like there's no waste, all that kind of stuff. And so we were able to accomplish these very advanced, like we would always say, every day is alien surgery day at MycoWorks. It was like we were like doing like these bizarre like operations on shoes, in these like, surgical theaters, like literally sewing living pieces of mushroom together to make these Frankenstein things, which would then grow together and become these, monolithic composites. So these would have 3 or 4 different materials, like, again, like the sole would be the spongy one. We'd make a reinforced strap. You would have like an insert of a harder thing, and they would all just kind of grow into this singular object. And so we're still, again, like NASA's really interested in this now, but like we were way far ahead of, it was like not for earthbound kind of things of like how you're going to manufacture in space or how you would like grow these kind of things. So even in the patents that MycoWorks has filed, if you ever want to go back, like it describes inside of those some of these applications of using our sheet-based things of what we could potentially do, or again, like just really different sort of ways of making composites. Yes.
And they were small, so I was the only one who could model the shoes.
They also might have been fitted to your feet.
Right, exactly.
It might have been based on your shoes.
Grown, custom grown.
Yeah. So a lot of different, again, just kind of proof of concept. And, it is like, they really don't look like much, but again, it was sort of like, but they are so advanced.
It was to demonstrate the concept.
Yes, yeah. And again, of just like not really understanding the program of capitalism.
Okay, I wanna get through my last couple questions, talk 10 more minutes, and then I want to make sure we have 15 minutes for just all of you to have at it and ask Phil anything you want. So, okay, crazy early days. We finally figure out we're doing leather, and the rest is MycoWorks history, as you all know it. Any portable lessons for you from that time that still serve you today?
Oh boy. Don't do it.
It's really hard.
I think like early on, one of the terms that we used was radical trust and also triangulation through trust, or we had to triangulate trust. So really the idea of trust was really critical. And even in my new NGO nonprofit type startup, we actually talk about this now as a formalized thing. The speed of trust, like things that happen as like they can go very slow because you might have to create or build or make trust, or they or it might be immediately. You're like, oh my god, this is my person, or like we're family, and then you can like, let's agree to do this kind of thing. And so we were naive about business, so we didn't really know who to trust, and we were coming up against a lot of sharks, and we just knew that we were swimming naked in shark-infested waters, and that was sort of like the image that we really had, is like, we have something incredibly valuable. We're not sure how to protect ourselves. We don't know who are really our allies or people who are trying to rip us off, and we have to progress. We have to go into this world in some way without amongst strangers. And also, like, which is like, you have to be open then and extend that. You can't just be defensive or aggressive. So that was really, I think, like a big part of it. And just we would go to someone we trusted, and they would tell us, like, you should talk to this person. I've known them for X number of years, and we would just sort of hand it off. And I just remember like weeks and months of just like, someone would say, like, you should go talk to so and so, and then we would go talk to them, and then they would kind of shine on us, or they like appreciated our naivete or something like that, and they'd take us under their wing and be like, oh my god, sharks are going to eat you, good lord, talk to our friend here. And so we were just kind of passed along in that way. So it was really just sort of like the kindness of strangers seemed really critical, and that people's beneficence was always there. Like, people really did help us out a lot. And some really tough lessons. I remember, like, when we got knocked, they're like, you're not ready, and just people telling us, like, you like, you'll, again, like, people who like an uncle or a cousin or a relative who'd be like, you're going to get the shit beat out of you if you go out there and do this. Let me tell you how to protect, or like, I'm going to give you a little lesson. Like, this is a light version of what you're going to get out there. And so, like, are you ready for that? And be like, oh, like, not quite, thank you. Like, no, like, things like that. So there was just like a lot of really humbling kind of situations where someone would punch you in the face and be like, yeah, you're not ready, or something, just to prove it. And, without taking our lunch, but just sort of like giving us a little lesson there. So that was definitely, maybe the New York upbringing really helped us, and like stand back up again, kind of thing.
There was that one time that we tried to get help from a lawyer in setting up the company, and the lawyer's like, I will totally help you for like
50% of the company.
50% ownership of the company.
And this was like, and we're like, I know, and it was really sort of sad too, because a lot of folks who were like, we thought we trusted from the art world were like really big rip-off art. Like it was like taking advantage of a lot of artists. Yeah. So it was sort of like our leaving our naive kind of things and being like, that person just seemed nice, but they really were not nice.
Okay, let's jump to the present.
Yeah.
Open Fung, tell everyone here about your new organization.
Sure. So, in creating MycoWorks, we were like, oh, we're trying to build whatever out of mushrooms. Surely there's people smarter than us who know something about that. It was like, actually, no. So, the journey of trying to figure out like how to domesticate, again, to take this mushroom that is traditionally been grown for medicines, maybe as the primary objective, or to actually try to kill it, to stop it from infecting your fruit trees or your forests or something like that, to then like, how to use this as an applied engineering material. And like, that's a completely different mindset. So even though there was a lot of information about reishi out there, but there's not a lot of information about how to use mushrooms as an engineering thing, or how to create standards or measurements. Again, as we all know here, as we're trying to wrangle this organism to do the stuff we want it to do. So, in creating the scientific board here and meeting the kind of brain trust around Ganoderma, those scientists were like, this is actually what needs to happen. Or they just sort of understood what was happening with MycoWorks, and they just were like a lot of guidance in just thinking about that. So Open Fung is trying to rationalize mushrooms in a different way than they have traditionally been rationalized. And we're using all of the tools of modern bioengineering to do that, but really thinking of like, how do you take this organism and create what we would call like a utility, like this thing that a lot of people can come to and get information or resources or utilize it in some type of way that they need to, and have out of the box information or reliable tools or reliable standards or things like that. So a lot of that stuff exists. It's distributed. There's a lot of different places on the planet that all that information resides, but to actually interpret it or to have it at hand in one location, or again, like for whatever you need to do with it, like that's very difficult. So currently, because of my 30 plus years of exposure, like I know how to speak the language or how to have someone help me translate that, or to figure out the software that you need to integrate with this thing to pull that data into some other. So it's very complicated. So we're trying to, again, like rationalized and domesticate, and also just provide a model for how you do that openly, so that it's transparent, so that the architectures that you're setting up, even the methodologies that you're setting up, other people can replicate that, with whatever organism, hopefully like another mushroom. Like we're saying, like, why are we doing Ganoderma? Well, what the program that we're taking up at Open Fung is like, wherever you are on the planet, you could start to approach a wild organism and think of like, how do we domesticate this? What are those processes? And we will have, again, like our book will be open about how you do that. We're also trying to, in doing this, because of networked digital technologies, by creating a measurable, standardized mushroom, other people can start to measure off of that from their local mushroom. So the dream of modern biomanufacturing is that you would have distributed manufacturing with different facilities around the planet that are all maybe making the same product or output, but from very different inputs and very different environments. So a lot of these polypores are globally distributed, but they're eating different things and they're living in different environments. So to kind of corroborate that information, you can do that, but it needs some sort of way to measure that, way to share information, way to have trustable information. One of the things that we've been doing is we've just been taking the archives and information about the California Ganodermas and trying to, again, like use all of the modern tools of bioengineering to just sort of look at those libraries and the mapping technologies, and so that there's just a better understanding of what's here in California. And so we've ended up just rectifying a lot of problems that exist in these data banks or centers. So if you were to buy a sample or order a sample list, you might not have received the thing that you thought you were getting. So we're just like clarifying all that so it's really clear, and that there are kind of like all of the permissions and approvals and things that one needs to do with domesticating an organism. And very much like the Valley systems here at MycoWorks, we're trying to think like 100 years back and 100 years into the future. So if you're going to bring an organism into domestication now, like there's a pretty tangled history of when we bring organisms into domestication from the last 100 years that are like, have a lot of problems with them, and or people are kind of doing piracy or maybe taking things or just not really getting the appropriate permission. So we're trying to look at that again, like backwards, like what is really here? What is the true map of where these things are, where they've come from, who's utilizing them, and also into the future, like what is the appropriate way to domesticate something so that people in 100 years will still feel like they could utilize this thing like 3 generations down the way. And so like really kind of being clear on how to operate with fungi. So part of it is methodology, some of it is institutional structures, but then it really is also similarly, how do you create a culture of practice? Like how do you create the interchange for the internet of fungus, that's coming? Like how do we actually figure out how to share information, how to represent that, how to connect it to the things in our world in a larger symbolic way as well. A big order.
Yeah, you got work. Your work for you.
Yeah, working it out.
I can talk about Open Fung all day. I want to have you very quickly walk us through the resources that you are recommending. If anyone is interested in following your footsteps in deep mycelial knowledge, but very briefly, like just a couple minutes, and then open it up to the group.
Sure. So La Varine Pratique, this is this really amazing cookbook, French cookbook. French cuisine has, again, like standards and measures. So again, like in the analogy to mushrooms. And for my education as a chef, I worked in a couple of French restaurants, but this really went through the instructional, and it's a very well illustrated, again, pre-internet, of like how you actually create particular sauces, mixtures, all the things like that. So I think of this as the process engineering of composites that are, my education into this, suspensions, liquids, for all the sort of different states of matter that one has to construct. That is the beginning place to really think of that, and really in relationship to your body. We also know that there's a lot of, as an actor, to your biocomposite, it's not just a neutral scientific thing. There's definitely a lot of interactions between yourself and the organism. So that was sort of my engagement of really thinking about process in relationship to materials. It was in food and pastry and French cooking, French cuisine. And then modernist cuisine was published, I think, about 20 years ago by Emeryville, one of the founders of, I think, Atari. And some other folks around here in Silicon Valley spent millions of dollars of their own money to take the next step in rationalizing cooking. So really took the modern scientific process. So again, like taking that way further into how to make really crazy kind of materials. So I still recommend that. I don't think that there's any course of study available yet in the world to get you introduced to this, just by the way that the fungus education currently exists. Like there is no practicum other than interactions with machines or other, like, so actual engagement with material composition. Understanding fungi. So Hyper-C is really like the thinking that I have about the body of mushrooms and how they move through space and other materials. Hyper-C created the idea in my mind of the history of fungus, like going back almost like 1 billion years, and just like how they have reshaped our material world as it exists right now. And so it gives you a better understanding of just how the world looks right now and how it operates in an organic way. And also materials. In the case of Hyper-C, it's about the environment, like how literally our environment is made by living things and how that comes into being. And again, of like how mushrooms exist, or like the fluid interchange on land that is not the sea, which is kind of like the basis of what fungi are doing, is they're moving liquids around somehow on land. And just taking that mindset of like a sea that is mobile, like the sea that has entered onto the land and is still doing sea-like things of making sure that there are liquids always available for them. So that's that one. And then aesthetics, yeah. The bathroom here that I spent so much time on in Praise of Shadows is sort of like maybe 100 years plus earlier, at this time frame when Japan was just starting modernization and they just introduced electric lights. And so this was like this person thinking about what was happening and the loss of a certain aesthetic regimen and this introduction, and really being on the cusp of understanding what was about to be lost. And there's a lot of meditations of sitting on the toilet inside of that and how one thinks about the world from that point of view. So I was like, right on. Yeah, I absolutely. And, very elegant, very short, and just kind of an idea of, like the Madeleine, in remembrance of things past, just like how a certain aesthetic can evoke memory so profoundly. And so again, like, but, disassociated from the Madeleine, but taken it to some other realms of just like tiny things one notices and might be lost or gained, or again, like just very very things. And then aberrations, oh boy, yeah, that's like a pretty advanced conceptual approach to things we maybe don't understand about other cultures' aesthetics. So for me to grasp the grotesque, like how to think about that as an aesthetic category that does not have the typical political, emotional connotations that we would bring to it. And then a lot of other things that are, like of how transformation from like an animal to a human, things that we see very commonly now in cartoons, but this was also has been in human thinking, just like things that have been in human thinking that we still express and see manifested, but to kind of pull them out into these broader, interesting categories, and just really thinking like, how do we understand the things that we see? Like, how do we think about the things that we like or dislike? Like, what's coming to us with those feelings?
As you're talking about aesthetics, I'm reminded of a quote that I saw on the wall at the Exploratorium just last weekend, which is actually where you and I had our first ever interview when you're interviewing me as your artist assistant. And I think it's a nice way to wrap. It's from Frank Oppenheimer, who is the founder of the Exploratorium, which is a science and discovery museum in San Francisco and brother of the more famous Oppenheimer. And I think it's germane for us. Scientists and artists are the world's noticers. Their job is simply to notice what other people cannot. Thank you, Phil Ross.
Yeah. Thank you.
Questions from the team. Online, I will watch the chat if you want to drop a question into the chat, and anyone here. Yeah.
All right, thanks for. So as an artist starting to work with fungi, you had to figure out how to what to do to make the fungi do what you want them to do, right? So what was your personal strategy there? Was it reading a bunch of scientific papers or talking to mushroom growers, or was it more like learning by doing?
It was really, I wanted, I wanted to make them do things. So, again, it was really just like poking something with a stick, like, I don't know, like mindset. When I started to make them into sculpture, I wanted them to look like architectural miniatures of things that were very famous, like the Duomo in Florence. And so someone would see it and be like, oh, that's that this is some art, there was something to ground it because they looked so otherworldly and weird. And then I wanted the antler. Really, my first love was the antlers. And so I was just really trying to figure out how to control the antlers in ways. And so using phototropic, like moving light bulbs around the room in a way or moving the object in relationship to the light bulb. Moving the object in relationship to gravity, which we still know is really important. So that was sort of like in early, so it was really just like all these things that I knew they would react to. I was just like, what would it do? But it was really more of like, I wanted a certain aesthetic. Like I wanted the Duomo, but I wanted antlers growing out of the Duomo. So it'd be like, that's familiar, but that's really unfamiliar, that kind of thing. And, or, this milk splash from this Edgerton photo, and I wanted the antlers just to grow on the outside. So that each one of these things just taught me something about like, oh, you can induce a particular growth here, or you could get it to change, or all these things, or I want it to look this way, or it really was aesthetic drivers. So this is still, I think, like my intuitive self-education around these mushrooms was like looking at what they were doing out in the wild. Like I spent a lot of time collecting. I still collect these out in the wild. So I look at all of the variations of the organism by these tiny little differences of where they're growing, and try to, again, like the way that one tracks in the forest, like you're trying to figure out the scene. You're like, okay, does the fog precipitate here in this nook? Is there more moisture at this thing? What is the soil consistency? What are the trees around it? Where is the wind? Like you're just trying to figure out like all the stuff that would give rise to a particular location. Like, why is this organism here? Why is it doing this thing? And you'd see like, wow, it's growing this really interesting thing when there's a lot more moisture or other stuff like that. So my material knowledge of the organism is really aesthetically driven. And even when our early clients would come to us, they'd be like, I want it to be like this. And so I was just like, it's going to look like this. So this is why we have to set up these environmental conditions to achieve this aesthetic. They're describing a certain aesthetic. So I know the environment that's going to give rise, same way as like an artist would pick up a brush. Like, I want you to make a picture of a dove flying, and they're like, okay, great. I know how to mix the colors and, the technical knowledge around it to achieve that aesthetic outcome. So that was really a big part of it. And so when I was trying to do these things, like I want this to look more ancient, or I want this to look like this, or I want these things to join together. And so it's just like really like, what happened in nature that allowed that to happen? what was the air exchange, what was the temperature, what were all these kind of things that are doing the phenotypic, the way that the organism is responding to these particular things, that its sense, again, like its virtuosity, its sensitivity to these, like you could read it. And so, and still to this day, like I read the mushrooms when I go out to the woods, I'm like, I can tell like what's happened there, just even like the movement of the tree over, several years. I can do all the, there's all this stuff the patterns are all there to be read, but it's, again, like it's really just a matter of discernment. So I don't know, that's a long-winded way to come back to say, like, it was really just sort of adapting that, but towards very, like aesthetics that also have like material qualities. So that was just like, again, like that was a deeper kind of investigation into that.
Thank you.
Sure.
One more question. So maybe on the similar lines, I'm curious to understand or get your perspective on how to tame this wild horse. I think we're still kind of figuring it out, right? As we grow, we face challenges day to day, like we're fixing things, which is in the same realm of we are surprised sometimes by the organism. Oh,
yes,
we can do that. Sometimes positive, sometimes negative. So maybe your perspective on how to continue developing this technology.
Yeah. So we are looking at it from a multi-omics point of view, and then having, so that is like first trying to figure out like what are the salient genetics that we're actually looking for, like because it's not the genes that are interesting for materials are not expressed in every single Ganoderma. So just even trying to understand that, like what are the genes and how are they represented, and then doing sequencing, and then growing the organism under a lot of different conditions, and then trying to, again, like having on a standardized material that's been qualified. So we're using the Department of Energy's biomaterials, which have, kind of gold standards as far as rationalized substrates, and then triangulating off of that to the largest global kind of substrate ones, and looking at the differences in metabolic reaction to that. And there's a lot of multi-omic kind of stuff that you can do now in that. And again, like learning from other scientists who've done this, just like how to discern what the genes are doing that are of interest, and just their representation. And again, like most of this stuff is very cryptic, or just again, like not well rationalized. So again, just even in the last 5 years, a lot of information technologies have become a lot cheaper. A lot of automation, a lot of AI tools can come to bear upon this stuff. So it's not rocket science. This is the same thing with MycoWorks. It was like, this does not require a miracle. This just requires some different configuration of people coming together. And so it's very similar with OpenFung. It's like, there are people, like, you can start to rationalize the Ganoderma, but it has to be done in a slightly different way and than it has been practiced in the past. So just understanding how genes function, doing there's just the work could go on for decades in terms of it, but there's pretty good direction of like what needs to be done. So it's not, it's difficult, but not that difficult. And it really is just more of like integration part. A large part of his language, again, same at MycoWorks, is like getting different groups who have to come and communicate together who currently are not. And so that means inventing new languages, customs, social interactions, so that those people actually can start to share. We see, like, again, like a large part of it is the interaction. So making things that are understandable from these weird hybrid or pigeon languages that are then translated into more common languages that a larger population can actually participate in. So again, like a lot of different pieces. It's not like there's like one thing that'll do it, but it's like multi-omics, information technologies, AI, design, sociological, like people, agreeing on things, a lot of stuff like that. And, it's easier now to share data and a lot faster to do that. So there's just ways to network stuff to do those kind of things. And yeah, again, it's just like, it's a really exciting time around omics, just because of, again, like where machine learning is at.
I think we'll take one more question from Phil.
So we have a really large bathroom here in
Yes.
Emeryville,
Yeah.
and it's abnormally large. And there's a lot of really cool pictures in it. Is there a story behind that?
For those of you not here, we're Phil is asking about our public demonstration guest bathroom that Phil personally designed and installed. If you ever come to California, you have
Gotta
to
use the bathroom.
have the bathroom experience.
That was my my axe to bear, or whatever, axe to grind. You know, for the beginning of MycoWorks was out of my art studio, which was in a basement below the, you know, like people talk about a garage startup. This is in the basement below the garage. So that's how. It was also right above a spring. The top of the bottom of the top of the hill on top of the spring. I don't know, that's like the weirdest thing, but that's what that studio was. So there's a natural spring, so like the toilet would back up. It's very difficult to do that. And then we had something like 17 people working in this like tiny little basement with like one little toilet that didn't flush very well. And then so that bathroom was kind of horrific, and you sort of like had to have a bucket to pour water down it. You know, it was just sort of like, it was so abject. And then we would have all of these people, students, anybody who would come to visit, and they would bring us like mushroom tchotchkes or like a hand knitted thing, or they found a mushroom plaque, and we're like, and I was like, always was banished to the bathroom. I was like, I can't have this crap, just put it in the bathroom. So we just started to decorate the bathroom with all of the mushroom kitsch that I did never, an uninvited mushroom kitsch, that, so it just kind of started to accumulate in there. So the bathroom kind of had certain connotations, like, so you'd go in the bathroom, it wouldn't work very well, but there'd just be like all this like weird homemade stuff. So I was like, someday we're gonna have a good bathroom. Someday, you know, I was like, so in terms of like fantasies of a company, I was like, we're gonna have a good bathroom someday. It's just, that's like my, again, like, I'm gonna live in a weird decrepit, you know, dome with naked on a lawn chair with a bunch of cats, and I was like, we're gonna have a good bathroom. See, so you just put the vision out there, and sometimes you can manifest. So similarly with this one, we were like, okay, we'll get all this like mushroom kitsch, but let's like make it nice mushroom kitsch. So it was really like our choice rather than like, you know, the gifts of strangers. You're like, oh, this is wonderful. It's like there was like, so you know, Lindsay Filowitz, who was working with me to really kind of manifest this project, she and I just started to go through Etsy or something like that, and we just started to buy up all these weird postcards and things like that of stuff that were like, oh yeah, that's great, that would be good, and just kind of like our own association with mushrooms that we felt were more beyond the like the like the red spotted white, you know, whatever, that one. So
I feel like it was also, we were still fresh off of our years of pitching all of the investors in Silicon Valley, and we were very impressed with the different receiving rooms and bathrooms that we would experience in all these very, very wealthy investors' offices, and you know, like Sequoia, and well, you know, and so I think with that redwood room and with the bathroom, it was our way of saying like, we have now arrived, and we have a very nice receiving room and bathroom as well.
Yeah. Yes, we are here.
Anyway, thank you so much. Well, please let us have a random applause for Phil.